Today we are going to complete Unit 4, Lesson 6, which will be a review on slope-intercept form. Slope-intercept form is in the form of y equals mx plus b, and it gets its name from the two important pieces of information that it gives to you, which is the slope, the m, and the y-intercept, which is the b. We're going to be using this information to graph a line without creating a function table like we were doing prior in the unit. So in order to graph this line without making a function table, we are going to begin by graphing the y-intercept. Okay, and we do use the letter B for the y-intercept. If it's helpful, you can use B to help you remember that that is where we begin, is at the B. Then we will use our slope. Remember, slope is rise over run, which it says right there, to help us plot some more points. And then our third and final step will be to use a ruler or a straight edge that extends through the points, and then we put an arrow on both ends to show that that line does go infinitely in both directions. So let's start out with example number 1. My first step in example number 1 is going to be to identify the B. Okay, the B equals 1, and the ordered pair that we're going to plot on the coordinate plane is going to be 0, 1. So let's do that. And it's right there. Our next step is to identify the slope. Remember, the slope is the number in front of the x variable. And my slope here is 2 over 3. All right. Now, we are going to add a note at the very bottom of your paper. All right, so the note that we're going to add is when you're using slope to plot more points, you can adjust the top and bottom signs to change the direction that you're moving on the graph. And I'm going to give you just a quick example of why that would be useful. All right, if my y-intercept is way up here, and then my slope is a positive, let's say, 5 over 2, if I try to go up 5 spots from right here, I'm out of graph paper, right? And so it wouldn't really fit on the graph that's provided to me. Okay, but if I change both the signs of the top and the bottom, so in this case they were originally both positive, I'm going to make them both negative. Now I would be able to go down 5 and left 2 and plot a point down below that will fit on my graph. Okay, so that's one example if they're both positive. If they were both negative, then you would just make them positive and do the opposite of them. What if they're different? So let's say, like in our example, well, I'm just going to make one up. If I had negative 1/2, okay, and I didn't have the room to go down 1 and then right 2, I could change it to say positive 1 on top, negative 2 on bottom. Now, I did mention this in a prior lesson that it doesn't change the value of fractions when you move the negative sign, okay? It's just the same as if it was right in the middle where the fraction bar is. But when we're doing rise and run, it's not helpful to have it right in the middle. We need to assign that negative to go with either the top number or the bottom number, okay? So the key to this, though, is that you have to remember to change both the top and bottom signs. okay, not just one of them. All right, so let's go back to our number one, and I'll show you how we can apply this. All right, so I'm back to example number one. The slope I identified is 2/3. So when I am at the y-intercept, I can go up 2 and then to the right 3 and make a new point. And I can keep doing that. Up 2, up 2, over 3 and make a new point. But notice now that if I try to go up 2 and over 3, I run off of the graph. So I can go back to that y-intercept and change both directions. So now instead of going up and right, I'm going to go down 2 and left 3, and then I'll plot a point. And you can keep going as long as you want. You can go till you run out of graph paper, or you can go until you feel like you have enough points that you feel like you can make a nice line, okay? So the points I'm going to connect are, and I'm just going to make them bigger, there, 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 and there. And notice that even after changing directions, all of those points line up nicely, so I can do my last step, which is to connect them with a line and put arrows on both ends. Awesome. Let's go and try example number 2. So I'm using yellow to identify all of my y-intercepts. So in this case, B is -2. The ordered pair that I will plot is 0, -2. So 0, and then down 2, and there is my y-intercept already plotted. Let's go back to my slope-intercept equation and identify the slope, which is 4/3. And I can also say that m is -4 over -3, so that I am able to change directions easily. And now I'm going to use my slope starting from the y-intercept, and I'm going to plot some more points. So I'm going to go up 4 over 3, plot a point, up 4, and then over 3. I counted up a little too much that time, so I just corrected it. Okay, and then if you want to just double check, you can go back to the y-intercept, make sure that it lines up. You can go down 4 and then left 3. Now I'm ready to connect all of my points with a straight line and then put my arrows on the ends. Hopefully we remember doing this last year in 8th grade, and it should feel like it's pretty easy to do. So what I'd like for you to do is pause the video and try example number 3. All right, so I have identified my y-intercept as well as the ordered pair that I need to plot, and then I've plotted it. So I've identified my slope, and I have plotted some points using my slope, down 1, to the right 2. I didn't think it was necessary to change directions this time. You don't always have to. It's just important to know that it is an option for you if you run out of graph. Oops, let me try that again. Now I can connect my points with a nice straight line, or So much fun. Perfect. All right, and then just remember that back when we were doing lesson 4 and we were talking about our positive and negative slopes, just remember, so we had a negative 1/2 slope. So read our line just like we read a book. From left to right, my line should be going down, and you can still use that as a way to self-check yourself, okay? My slopes in both examples 1 and 2 were positive slopes. So from left to right, these lines are going in the upwards direction. Perfect. Let's look at example number 4. Okay, so my y-intercept is 7. So the ordered pair that I will plot is 0, 7. All right, and then my slope here is m equals -3. But when I go to graph this, I need to know what the rise and the run are. So whenever you have a slope that's just an integer, I want you to put it over 1 and make it into a fraction. Okay? And then, of course, also you could plot +3 over -1. But in this case, I wouldn't be able to do that because there's no space on this graph to go up 3. Okay? So I'm just going to stick with the original, which would be down 3, +1, and then plot that point. Do it again, down 3, and then over 1. Once I get to 3 points, I usually stop and connect them. You could keep going if you wanted to until you ran out of graph, just so that you knew that it was done exactly correctly. Okay? Perfect. So I think that we've seen an example of each kind. What I want for you to do now is to pause the video and all right, so you have completed examples 5 and 6 on your own. Just take a look and make sure that you've got something like what I do. I know that these are kind of small and it's a little difficult to see or count your rise and run. Outside of our notes, your graph should be a little bigger and clearer, so it won't always be this difficult. Okay, so that is steps for graphing lines that are given to us in slope-intercept form. Now on the other side of the paper, we're going to flip this around. What if instead of giving us an equation, they give us a graph? So we are still going to be identifying our slope and our y-intercept, but instead of identifying it from the equation like we did here, we're going to identify it from the graph. So I'm still going to use yellow for my y-intercept, and I'm still going to use blue for my slope, okay? So the y-intercept is where the line crosses the y-axis. And I have added that note to remind myself out to the side. And remember, the y-intercept letter that they use is B, okay? So I find the y-axis, and I look at where does the line cross that. And it looks like it is down 2, so that is -2. And now I'm going to identify the slope using 2 points from the graph. So you can start anywhere when you already have a whole graph lined or plotted for you. So I'm going to start at the bottom left. I need to rise up 1 and run over 3. So my slope is 1/3 because I went up 1 and I ran 3. And then now to write the equation is going to look like y equals mx plus b, and I just put the m in here, and I put the b at the end. Y equals mx plus b. All right, now just because the equation says y equals mx plus b does not mean that the b is always going to be a positive number. Okay, why don't you pause the video and try number 2. All right, so my b is way up here at 7, and my slope is, let's see, down 5 and run 2. So because I went down, it's negative, and then I went to the right, so it's positive 2. So my equation will be y equals negative 5 halves x plus 7. Now, in this case, our 7 was positive. We do need to separate the 7 from the x variable with a sign of some kind. So if our number is negative, that will be a negative, and if our number is positive, then I have to put that plus sign there. All right, let's go and do the you try section. So I'd like for you to pause this video until you have completed both examples 3 and 4, and then come back and check 3 and 4 with mine. All right, so here are my examples 3 and 4, and I do just want to point out the slopes. In example 3, my slope was 4 over 1. So when I wrote my final equation, I reduced that to just say 4. In example 4, my slope was negative 2 over positive 2, and that reduced to a negative 1. Okay, and then another way that you could write this when the slope is 1 would be just y equals negative x plus 7. You don't have to put the 1 in front of the x, but in this case you would have to keep the negative sign there. All right, let's go try examples 5 and 6. Pause the video, and unless you've already completed them both. But if you haven't, pause the video and then complete 5 and 6. All right, here are the solutions for examples 5 and 6. And then I just want to point out in number 5 that because my y-intercept was at 0, I did write y equals 4/3 x plus 0, but then I also simplified that here down below. You do not have to write the plus 0 if that is the y-intercept. All right, hopefully this review really helped you remember how to both graph a slope-intercept form of a line, as well as looking at the graph and pulling out the slope and the y-intercept so that you can write the equation. It's really good that to be able to go back and forth between the equation and the line on the graph. All right, there is a practice assignment posted for you on Google Classroom, as well as a worksheet on Mrs. Brown's desk that you can complete.